The snow fell soft as a hush, like heaven itself was holding its breath. Martha Jane Holloway walked alone through it, the hem of her father's wool coat darkening with melt. It was too big for her, a preacher's coat, heavy with sermons and expectation, but it clung to her like a second skin, its scent of old pine and tobacco grounding her as her steps led away from everything she'd ever known. She didn't cry. Not yet. Not even when the wind cut across her cheeks like judgment. Her boots were lace tight, her fingers stiff in gloves she hadn't worn since childhood, and her breath rose in silver puffs as she moved down the road away from Holloway Farm, away from the churchyard, away from the room where her mother once brushed her hair and said nothing about the world. She hadn't left a note. She figured silence would serve her better now, just as it had all her life. She was 25, with nothing but a shadowy ring of shame following her ever since she turned 17 and the town decided she wasn't quite pretty enough to catch the right man, nor meek enough to make a good one feel big. But Clay Radnor had noticed her. The sheriff. Tall, hard-eyed, silver-spurred. 35 and feared by most, wanted by many. When he said her name out loud in the general store, Martha had felt like a lantern had been lit inside her. When he touched her wrist, just once, she'd felt a kind of heat she'd never known. Her father had said Clay was a godless man, prideful and cruel. But Martha had seen the way he looked at her across church pews, like she was something to burn and keep warm by. That look had undone her. He'd asked her to meet him before dawn. Said he'd ride them over the ridge, to a circuit judge waiting to make her Martha Radnor. And he had. They stood beside a barn just over the county line. The judge was half-drunk and wrapped in buffalo hides. Clay said the vows, gripped her hand too tight, and when the judge asked if she consented, she nodded before her throat could think. No kiss. No laughter. No witnesses but a tired horse and the long stretch of sky above them, pale with approaching light. By noon, he was gone. She woke in a stranger's inn, the bed barely slept in beside her, and found only his sheriff's star laid neatly on the table, no note, no coin, no promise. Just that glinting badge like a slap to the mouth. The innkeeper's wife wouldn't meet her eyes. The other guests whispered. One woman pointed at the lace veil in Martha's lap and asked if she was one of those paid girls, sent up here for someone's cruel joke. Martha left before they could say more. She walked barefoot because her boots had gone stiff in the cold. She kept her veil because it was the only thing that felt soft anymore. No horse. No coin. No husband. Just the heavy coat that still held her father's silence in its seams and the shame beating loud in her chest. She made it 3 miles before her knees buckled. The snow was deeper by then, a hush upon the hush. The trees had grown thicker, darker, standing like judgment all around her. The world went gray. She fell beside a pine stump, her cheek against the crusted snow, her body curling in on itself like a secret. And that's when she heard the hoofbeats. Not galloping, steady. Measured. A sound that carried through the frost like a decision being made. She tried to rise but couldn't. Her arms shook. Her breath caught in a sob. The hoofbeats stopped. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the soft clink of reins, the sound of boots and snow, and a voice, not harsh, not urgent, just there, low and calm. You'll freeze like that. She lifted her head, and the first thing she saw was the fur-lined edge of a buckskin coat. Then the man. Dark hair pulled back, snow caught in his beard, eyes the color of river stones, deep and still. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't reach for her. Just crouched beside her, letting her decide if she would speak. She didn't. Couldn't. He laid a thick blanket over her legs and offered a piece of dried fruit in one gloved hand. His other hand held the reins of a dun-colored horse, its breath steaming into the sky. I'm called Felix, he said simply. Come home. Martha closed her eyes. Her lips were cracked from wind, her voice lost. Her shame lay loud between them like a bell no one wanted to ring. She should have said no. Should have run again, crawled into the snow, vanished with her disgrace like so many women had before her. But when he lifted her into the saddle, the movement was so gentle, so precise, she wept not from pain, but because she realized she had never been carried before. Not like this. He didn't ask her name. Not yet. And that made it easier. The wind picked up. Snowflakes caught in her lashes. As he walked beside the horse, leading her through pines that seemed older than memory, Martha wondered if maybe she'd died and this was some quiet corner of heaven where no one asked what you did wrong, only whether you were cold. Behind them, the trail vanished in white. The town was still there. The church bells still rang. Her father's sermon still roared against sin. Clay likely still polished his boots and laughed with men who thought cruelty made a man strong. But up ahead, smoke curled from a chimney, and the scent of burning juniper met the wind. Felix said nothing as he opened the door and led her inside. A fire waited. A cradle sat unused in the corner. And for the first time since she'd left in her father's coat, Martha breathed without shaking. She thought she had run away from judgment. But she had only walked toward something slower, something quieter, something that, maybe, had the makings of mercy. The fire cracked. Felix stirred something in a pot. The snow fell steady outside. And Martha, still in that old wool coat, sat down to a second cup already waiting at the table. The cabin was built from thick-cut logs, darkened by time and weather, tucked deep enough into the pines that the wind softened before it touched the door. Martha sat near the hearth wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of leather and smoke, her feet bandaged in strips of flannel. She hadn't said more than 5 words since Felix brought her there, and he hadn't asked for any. Outside, snow whispered against the windows, making the room feel more like a world unto itself, sealed, silent, slowly warming. Felix moved with quiet purpose. He stirred the stew hanging above the flame, added another log, checked her bandages without a single unnecessary touch. His hands were wide and calloused, a scar cutting through the knuckle of his thumb. He never looked at her long, but when he did, there was no hunger in it. Only steadiness. The cradle in the corner stayed untouched. Dust had gathered in the curve of the rockers. A single red ribbon hung from its edge, limp and faded. She wanted to ask about it. She didn't. Felix set a tin cup beside her and said, "Juniper tea. You'll want it hot." Her fingers shook as she reached for it. He noticed, didn't comment. Just sat across from her, not too close, and drank from his own cup. The silence between them wasn't cruel. It was soft, almost companionable, like two ghosts sitting by the same fire. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like frost underfoot. "Why did you help me?" Felix didn't look up. "Because you needed help." That simple? It usually is. She stared into the fire. "I left my father's house before dawn. Thought I knew what I was doing. Thought I had love waiting at the end of it." The flames danced in her eyes as she swallowed hard. "He married me and left me before I could even remember what it felt like to be wanted." Felix leaned back in his chair. "Sheriff?" She nodded once. He said nothing for a long while. Then, softly, "Some men wear power like a weapon. Others wear it like a wound." That silenced her again, but in a gentler way, like he'd named something she didn't know could be named. She looked down at her hands. "I don't want to go back. But I don't know where to go instead." Felix stood, not with urgency but with a kind of quiet finality, and stepped to the door. He opened it just wide enough to let in the cold. Snow swirled in the doorway, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he looked over his shoulder. "Then stay here. For now." She blinked. "You don't even know me. I know what it looks like when someone's been shamed. And I know the world don't give women many places to heal." He shut the door again. The latch clicked gently. She closed her eyes. For 3 days, she remained there. At first, she sat still and tried to be invisible. Then, slowly, she began to move, pouring water from the kettle, sweeping the floor, slicing vegetables for the evening stew. Felix never told her what to do. He simply made room. On the 4th morning, she tried to leave. She slipped out before dawn, boots laced, veil tied under her coat, her small bag slung over her shoulder. The snow was light now, barely a dusting. The wind was sharp, but the sun was trying to rise. She made it halfway to the trail before she heard him behind her. "I didn't say you couldn't leave." She turned, eyes narrowing. "Then why follow?" He shrugged. "Because you didn't look sure." "I'm not." Her voice broke. "But staying makes me feel like I'm asking for something I don't deserve." He stepped closer, boots crunching in the pale snow. "You're not asking. You're recovering." Her breath caught. "It's not your job to fix me." "I'm not trying to." His voice was so calm it nearly undid her. "But if the trail's too long, you're welcome to warm yourself a little longer." She didn't answer. Instead, she turned around and walked past him, back toward the cabin. He didn't smile. Just followed at a respectful distance, like he knew the difference between guiding and hovering. That night, she sat beside him on the porch while the stars sharpened above them. The snow had stopped. The sky stretched wide and quiet. He carved something small between his hands, wood, likely, maybe a horse or a bird. She couldn't quite tell. "Who did the cradle belong to?" she asked softly. His hands stilled. "My wife," he said. "And our daughter." "What happened?" "Fever. Both of them. Winter came too hard that year." She looked down. "I'm sorry." He didn't reply. The silence spoke enough. "I was taught that being a wife meant serving God through obedience," she murmured. "But I think obedience without kindness is just a prettier name for being silent while someone walks away." Felix didn't look at her, but his voice was thoughtful. "And kindness without truth is just a prettier way to lie." She smiled, sad and genuine. "You speak in riddles." "I speak in what I've lived." She pulled her knees to her chest. "I thought marriage would make me someone." "You already were." The wind shifted, bringing with it the scent of pine and something else, lavender, maybe, from the pouch she kept hidden in her pocket. A small thing from home she hadn't wanted to part with. He stood slowly. "Tomorrow, I'll show you how to saddle the horse if you want." "I'd like that." He nodded once, then paused at the door. "And if you ever do leave, don't leave before breakfast. It's better warm." The door clicked behind him. She stayed outside a little longer, staring at the dark horizon. The wind pulled gently at her hair, but she didn't shiver. She didn't belong to Holloway Farm anymore. And she certainly didn't belong to Sheriff Clay Radnor. But here, in this sliver of forest, in this cabin with its cradle and fire and silent man, she wasn't lost. Not exactly. Maybe she was just becoming. And for now, that was enough. It began with a whisper at the dry goods store, low, like a prayer not meant to be heard. "Reverend Holloway's daughter, she's with him." "Which him?" "The Apache widower in the pines." By the following Sunday, it was no longer a whisper. It was a certainty. It moved through the pews like a sickness and stuck to the corners of mouths, curled in judgment. They didn't say her name with malice, they said it with pity, which cut sharper. Martha didn't know at first. She was content with the rhythm of the cabin, the quiet grace of daily labor. She rose with the sun, swept the porch clean, learned to saddle the horse with fingers that used to stitch lace. She cooked over fire, gathered water from the frozen creek with sleeves rolled to her elbows, and listened to the woods more than her thoughts. Felix never crowded her. He worked on his leather goods, tanned in the smokehouse, mended tools in silence. When she brought him lunch, he always said thank you, but never touched her hand. He gave her space like a gift, not a sentence. It was on a trip to town for flour that she felt it shift. She wore a plain blue dress Felix had mended at the hem and a cloak borrowed from a hook by the door. Her hair was braided down her back, a ribbon tied soft at the end. Felix had offered to go in her stead, but she said she wanted to walk a road with her own feet for once. The town looked unchanged from a distance, roofs laced in snow, smoke rising steady from chimneys, children running from the schoolhouse. But up close, she could feel it, the pause in movement when she stepped through the general store door, the stiff smile from Mrs. Nettie behind the counter, the way two women near the barrel of coffee beans went suddenly quiet. Martha kept her head up. She asked for what she needed, placed her coins on the counter with steady fingers, and turned to leave. Behind her, someone whispered, "Thought she'd gone east. Didn't think she'd stoop." She froze, but only for a moment. Outside, the air hit her like a slap. She stood by the hitching post, blinking back the sting in her eyes. She didn't cry. Not in front of this place. Not for people who had never lifted a hand when Clay Radner threw her name around like it was something to spoil. When she returned to the cabin, Felix was repairing a broken fence rail. He looked up once, saw her face, and set the hammer down without a word. He took the flour sack from her and waited. "They know," she said. He only nodded. "They always do. They think I'm ruined. That I chose wrong twice. Then don't waste yourself proving them right." Later that evening, he brought in a bundle wrapped in deer hide and left it on the table. She opened it slowly, fresh fabric, dark red with tiny flowers. Good quality. Likely from his own barter stores. "I can't accept this," she whispered. "You live here now," he said simply. "Make it yours." The next morning, someone nailed a note to the church door. Felix found it during a run to the blacksmith's. He didn't tell her right away. He burned it in the stove before she saw it. But she felt it all the same, the way the townsfolk stared harder when she rode through with him, the way the preacher's gaze cut through her like wind through a broken window. Her father didn't speak her name. Not even once. Still, not everyone turned away. A widow named Cora, long-faced and tired-eyed, left a bar of lavender soap on their fence post with no note. A boy dropped a bag of apples by their door and ran off before they could thank him. Small things. Quiet mercies. Martha clung to those. In the stillness of their nights, she watched Felix as he read by lamplight, lips moving silently over words she couldn't quite see. Sometimes he carved. Sometimes he just sat, staring into the fire like he was talking to someone who'd left long ago. One evening, while peeling potatoes, she asked, "Why don't you tell them I'm not yours?" He didn't look up. "Does it matter what they think?" "It shouldn't," she admitted. "But it does." He set his knife down gently. "Then let them talk. Let them talk until their tongues fall off." She laughed before she meant to, soft and surprised. But there were limits to resilience. A week later, while trading furs, Felix returned with a bloodied lip. The man at the stable had said something crude about women who go where they don't belong. Felix didn't start the fight, but he finished it. He didn't complain. Didn't boast. But when she dabbed his lip that night, she saw the bruise blooming purple at the edge of his jaw and something inside her cracked. "I didn't ask you to defend me," she whispered. "I know. I'm not your responsibility." "You're not." "Then why?" He looked at her, really looked. "Because you shouldn't have to bleed for both of you." The wind howled outside. The cradle in the corner creaked once on its own. She turned her face to the fire, and neither of them said another word. The next Sunday, she rode to town with her head uncovered, her hair in 2 long braids, her shoulders square. She didn't sit in the church pews. She stood outside as the congregation filed in, waiting. The townsfolk walked past her like she wasn't real. Only her father paused, just long enough to look at her. Her lips trembled, but her gaze held. "You never asked if I was safe." He looked away. "You chose that path. I chose a man who promised me protection. You chose silence." He didn't answer. The church doors closed behind him. She stood alone in the snow, dressed bright against the gray, for the length of a full-in before turning back toward the trees. When she reached the cabin, Felix was waiting on the porch. She said nothing as she climbed the steps. But when he reached for the door, she put a hand on his arm. "They can talk all they want," she said quietly. "But I'm here. I'm standing." He nodded, and something unspoken passed between them, trust, not romance. Not yet. But something deeper. Inside, the fire was already lit. And outside, the snow began to fall again, not harsh, but soft, like a benediction. It was early spring when she wore white again, not the fragile kind laced with pearls and dreams, but a strong, simple dress she had sewn herself, dyed the soft color of snow not yet touched by dirt. It clung to her like forgiveness. She hadn't planned to wear it to town. It simply felt right that morning, the way certain things settle into place without needing explanation. The wind had softened, no longer biting but brushing, like it remembered how to be kind. Felix handed her the satchel and said nothing about the dress. Only offered a small nod, then adjusted the blanket on the horse before helping her mount. She noticed, then, how easily they moved around each other now, without instruction, without apology. A shared rhythm had formed, not from declarations but from quiet gestures, small habits. He didn't own her, and she didn't cling to him. But somehow, they belonged to the same silence. She rode into town upright, veil tucked in her pocket, hair braided with thread she had dyed from crushed berries. As they passed the first porch, conversation slowed. By the time they reached the main road, faces had turned. Children were called close. Someone dropped a basket of nails and let them scatter. No one said her name. No one had to. The general store door creaked louder than usual. She stepped inside with her shoulders square and asked for flour, salt, and 2 bolts of muslin. The shopkeeper, Mr. Dolly, cleared his throat, fumbled with the scale, and didn't quite meet her eyes. Still, he served her. Outside, a woman Martha once sang with in the church choir crossed to the other side of the street, her face like stone. "They think you're proud," Felix said quietly as they loaded the sacks. "I'm not," Martha answered. "But I'm done being ashamed." As they turned to leave, a girl 12, maybe 13, stepped forward from behind her mother's skirt and held out a single apple, cheeks flushed with the kind of courage only youth dares. "For you," the girl whispered. Martha knelt to take it, brushing her fingers across the small hand. "Thank you," she said softly, not just for the fruit, but for the gesture, the interruption of scorn. That night, back at the cabin, she placed the apple on the windowsill. It glowed red in the candlelight, a strange little trophy of something she couldn't name. Later, Felix sat whittling by the hearth, shaping what looked to be a carved horse. The cradle in the corner still stood unused, but the dust was gone now, the red ribbon replaced with a pale strip of cotton she'd hemmed from an old blouse. Martha watched him for a long time, then asked, "Do you regret it? Taking me in?" He didn't look up. "Do you?" "No." "Then I don't either." A pause settled between them. "I saw Clay today," she added. Felix's blade paused over the wood. He was with another woman. Younger. Dressed like she was trying to forget where she came from. "He see you?" "Oh, yes." She folded her hands. Smiled at me like he'd won. "He didn't." "No," she whispered. "He didn't." The next morning, Martha woke early and bathed in the creek. The water was near freezing, but she needed it. Needed the sting, the full-bodied reminder that she was alive, that her life was hers. She dried off with an old flannel, braided her hair tighter, and stepped back into the white dress. When Felix saw her, he didn't speak. But his gaze lingered. "I'm going to the town meeting," she said, slipping on her boots. "They won't listen." "They don't have to." The church's meeting hall was crowded. Heated not just by the wood stove but by the weight of unspoken things. She walked in alone. All heads turned. Reverend Holloway's jaw tightened but he said nothing. Martha stood near the back, waiting. When the talk turned toward new laws about land rights and settler boundaries, someone, Mr. Pelham, a rancher with a loud voice and thin mustache, spoke up. "We can't keep turning a blind eye to the kind of arrangements being made outside the law. Some folks letting in bad influence. Women living like wives without vows. No structure." His eyes didn't have to move toward her. Everyone knew. The silence crackled. Martha stepped forward, her boots loud on the wood. "I'm not here to argue," she said. "Only to remind you what the scriptures say about casting stones." A scoff came from the side, but she didn't flinch. "I was thrown out without shelter, mocked in your inns, left to freeze while you locked your doors." And the only man who picked me up asked for nothing. Not my name. Not my obedience. Just if I was warm enough. Her voice didn't waver. You call that shame? I call it mercy. No one answered. She nodded once, turned, and walked out, the skirt of her dress sweeping like a whisper across the floorboards. Outside, the sky had begun to gray, and the wind picked up again, but not sharply. Like it was changing its mind. She didn't rush. Let them watch. Let them remember. Felix stood by the horse, reins in hand. When she reached him, he touched the saddlebag gently. You all right? I said what I needed to. He helped her up without speaking. As they rode away, no one called after them. But a boy on the steps watched her go, not with judgment, but with curiosity. As though she'd just done something brave. By nightfall, the white dress hung by the fire to dry. She stood in her slip, hair loose, watching the cradle rock faintly in the heat's draft. She thought of the silence that used to suffocate her. And how now, it simply meant peace. Felix handed her a small pouch, lavender crushed with sage. For the pillow, he murmured. She held it to her chest. You think I smell like peace? I think you carry it. She turned to the fire. Maybe it took shame to teach me softness. He didn't answer. And he didn't need to. The snow came back late that year, soft as a memory, as though winter had forgotten something and returned only to retrieve it. The cabin sat quiet beneath its weight, smoke curling from the chimney like a breath from some sleeping thing. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Martha sat beside it, mending a tear in Felix's shirt, the white dress folded nearby, still marked with faint mud near the hem. She'd worn it into judgment and come out standing. Outside, the wind carried no warning, just stillness. That's how he arrived. Clay Radnor. He didn't knock. Felix saw him first, through the small square window. He rose slowly, wordlessly, and reached for the hat that hung by the door. Not the rifle. Just the hat. That said enough. Martha followed him out. Clay stood a few paces from the porch, his coat too fine, his boots too clean, like he'd come dressed for performance. A smirk curved one corner of his mouth. You wear it well, he said, nodding toward her. White. After everything. Felix said nothing. Just stepped forward, placing himself between them. Calm, not posturing. Clay's eyes flicked to him. You planning to keep her, Red Elk? Make a good settler wife out of a reverend spoiled girl? Felix met his gaze, quiet as snowfall. She doesn't need making. Clay laughed, but it rang hollow. You think taking her in erases what she did? She shamed her father. Shamed this whole town. Martha's voice cut through the cold. You mean I shamed you? Clay's jaw worked. You were a symbol, Martha. Your father's pride. All those sermons. All that fire and brimstone. I took it from him. Her breath caught. You married me just to ruin him. You think it was love? Clay spat. You were leverage. Easy to sway. Eager to matter. Felix's hands stayed at his sides, but every muscle in his body had stilled. Like a hawk midair, waiting to strike or to turn away. Martha stepped forward now, past Felix, past the porch steps, until she stood on level ground with the man who'd left her to freeze. I did matter, she said. Just not to you. He laughed again, but quieter now. You're not the first girl to think kindness lives in the arms of a savage. Then why are you trembling? She asked softly. Clay opened his mouth, then closed it. Behind him, the forest stretched silent and wide. He looked smaller than she remembered. Meaner. Less like a man and more like a voice she'd once let dictate who she was. I came to take you back, he said finally. Your father's old now. Sick. Wants to make peace. If you come quietly, we'll let this go. Felix stepped forward. You're not taking her anywhere. She's my wife by law. She's no one's possession.
Clay's hand went to his belt, not his gun, but near enough to draw eyes.
Martha didn't move. You already abandoned me once. You threw me to the snow. I should have died out there.
But you didn't, Clay said, voice flat.
No, she whispered. Because someone found me.
The wind picked up, shifting snow along the ground like silk.
Felix didn't draw. Didn't raise his voice. He only said one thing. Leave. Clay hesitated. He looked at Felix, then at Martha, then at the forest behind him as if realizing, perhaps for the first time, that there was no crowd to cheer him on. No town backing him. No pews, no judge, no badge, no star. Just the truth of what he'd done and the silence he'd left in its wake. He turned and walked away. Not a word more. Martha watched until he was gone from sight.
Her hands had gone cold, though she hadn't noticed. She curled them into her sleeves and stepped back toward the porch, heart beating so hard she thought it might echo off the trees.
Felix hadn't moved.
You didn't hit him, she said softly.
There wasn't need.
She looked at him, truly looked. The man who had pulled her from snow without asking for her story, who had never asked for more than what she was ready to give. The man who had shared his food, his quiet, and his grief like it was something sacred.
I want to stay, she said.
He met her eyes.
You already have.
Spring returned slowly, like a song remembered. The snow melted into the soil.
The fields began to breathe again.
One afternoon, she found him by the old garden bed, running calloused hands through the thawed earth. He looked up, squinting against the sun. I want to build a new cradle, he said.
Not because I expect anything. Just, it feels right.
She knelt beside him, pressed her fingers into the damp soil, and smiled.
Then let's build it together.
They married in the woods behind the cabin, under a stand of cottonwood trees. No preacher. No witness but the wind.
Felix carved rings from a branch fallen in the last storm.
Martha wore her white dress again, not for purity, not for ceremony, but because it reminded her who she'd become. There were no vows spoken.
They didn't need them.
That night, she sat on the porch as the lantern burned low, watching the snow that still clung to the far edges of the pines.
The town would keep talking. Her father might never call her name again.
But none of that held weight anymore.
Not here.
Felix stepped out, handed her a cup of tea, and sat beside her in the quiet. She leaned her head to his shoulder and whispered, "The snow didn't take me." He looked out into the dark and nodded.
No. I did.
And for the first time in her life, that didn't mean she'd been taken from, but chosen.
Cherished. Home.
Sometimes it isn't the fire that saves you, or the church, or the law. Sometimes it's a man with a quiet voice and steady hands who doesn't ask what you've done, only whether you're warm enough to start again.